Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on where you are in the world. And welcome to this learning experience brought to you by AWS and Eviden. My name is Cody, and I'd like to welcome you back to Techstrong Learning. We've got an exciting panel ahead. But before we get this thing kicked off, I do have just a couple of housekeeping notes I'd like to review. First, today's session is in fact being recorded. So if you miss any of our discussion, perhaps you'd like to rewatch or maybe share with a friend. The on-demand recording will be made available shortly after we conclude this live session today. If you'd like to engage with our panelists, there are a couple of options for you to do so. The first of which is the chat tab, which can be found on the right side of your screen. I'd like you to go ahead and start testing out that chat tab for us. Let us know from where in the world you are joining. We have a global panel, and so I'm sure we also have a global audience, and we'd like to see where everyone is at. If you do have any questions for our panelists, we would request you to send those into the Q&A tab directly to the right of that chat tab. Sending in your questions to that Q&A just ensures that we can help keep track of them and get to it in a timely manner. And of course, before we close out today, we will be giving away 4 $25 Amazon gift cards. And if you jump over to where it says handouts, you will see there's a link. And if you'd like to see any previous episodes of the Cloudbusting Podcast, you can check out those episodes there. So the topic of this episode is absolutely necessary, why modernizing your apps is a must. And leading our conversation today is Jez Ward, Global Head of Advisory Portfolio at Eviden and Atos Company. So, Jez, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and turn the program over to you.
Brilliant. Thanks, Cody. Much appreciated. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us on this day. We have a fantastic panel with us, and I can see we've got a number of live audience listening. So, hello to everybody. I see we've got people all over Germany, London, Atlanta. I'm currently in a place called Exmouth, which is in Devon, southwest UK. Very, very sunny here. We've got one of these beautiful days down here. So great to have you all. So let me just start first of all and explain Cloudbusting. I wouldn't mind actually in the chat. Has anyone actually heard or listened to any of the Cloudbusting podcasts? I'll just sort of keep an eye out for that. If not, we produce a podcast. We try and keep this very non-salesy. This is nothing to do with selling Eviden or Atos or CloudReach as we were. It's a thought leadership podcast. We like to talk about all things cloud, all things related to the cloud. Tend to come out with weekly episodes. We are yesterday on a long drive to Liverpool. There we go. That keeps the drive nice and easy, listening to cloud. We try and have a bit of fun on it. It's not all serious. We're not sort of sitting there geeking out on everything. We are trying to have a little bit of fun with what we talk about. And we thought today for this webinar, we would structure it in the style of one of our podcast episodes. So we're going to talk through it, go and introduce the panel that we've got, and then we're going to be talking about app modernization. So I would like Q&A. We'll leave a little bit of time at the end, or we'll try and answer some questions as we go through the podcast. So do feel free. There is a Q&A chat that you can ask some questions. Feel free to put anything up there. Any comments as we go through, we'll read them and try and get to the things as we go. So firstly, let me introduce my co-host, Darren. Darren has been with me for the last 2 seasons actually of Cloudbusting. Darren, do you want to just say hello and tell the audience a little bit about yourself?
Yep. So my name's Darren Boulding. I'm one of the advisors at Eviden, formerly CloudReach. I advise our executive customers or customers and the exec teams within the customers on their cloud journeys, their application modernization, adoption, and general transformation within the cloud. And I am a little bit hoarse today, Jez, for obvious reasons, as I have had a big weekend. And
we had a bet about how long it would take before Darren mentioned this. So he is a Luton Town supporter, the orange flag in the background there. And for those of you who are not in the UK, Luton is a tiny little place just north of London. Luton Town is a soccer team, football team, as we like to call it over here. who have just won promotion to the Premiership, so the top division in football in the UK, and so they're going to get beaten every match next season. But welcome and congratulations on that, Darren.
Yeah, so we had the final was on Saturday, our parade was on Monday, and now I'm just getting my voice back in time for this webinar and stream.
So it's all downhill from here.
It's pretty much downhill from here. Yeah.
Great. Let me introduce actually probably a little bit about me. I am the host of Cloudbusting. I've been hosting the podcast since we founded it about 3-4 years ago. My background as a CIO for a couple of fairly large hotel chains that I took to the cloud. The first one with AWS back in 2011. So one of the early adopters of the infrastructure as a service at the time. And I've been with what was CloudReach at Evident now for just over 5 years. And as Cody mentioned, I head up our advisory team and the portfolio products that we advise our customers on. Also really happy to be joined by Phil LeBrun. Phil is a friend of the show, has been on the podcast a couple of times and is with AWS. Phil, do you want to just say hi, introduce yourself, tell us a bit about yourself and your background?
Sure, thanks, Joe. It's Phil LeBrun. I've been at AWS about 3.5 years. I'm part of our enterprise strategy and evangelism team. So similar to Darren, I spend a lot of time with the C-suite and board of directors of large enterprises and organizations, helping them think through their transformation, often as much from a sort of human and organization point of view as a technology point of view. So accelerating their ability to learn lessons from others. Prior to this role, I was at McDonald's for a long time with a number of roles, and McDonald's too moved into AWS, enabling things like home delivery, e-commerce, and data.
So yeah, McDonald's is a fairly large organization. I think you probably say it falls into the enterprise category.
Relatively large, yeah, like top 20 or something.
Yeah. One in every town, if not two. Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. Looking forward to having you join the chat. And last, certainly not least, Gaurav Jindal. Gaurav is with Evident. Gaurav, do you want to just say hi and introduce yourself and a little bit on your background?
Yeah, absolutely. As mentioned and as my background reveals, I work for Evident. I'm based out of Toronto, Canada. I lead the AWS Cloud Native and App Modernization practice here at Evident. I am an architect by tradecraft. I come from a fairly deep technical background. I've been in the trenches, so to speak, working with AWS for a number of years that I'm afraid to reveal. It'll speak to my age. And spent quite a number of years in Japan working on AWS, so a bit of a unique experience there as well.
Brilliant. Thanks, Gaurav. Looking forward to the chat. So we are going to be talking about app modernization. So why would you go through the process of refactoring and modernizing your applications on cloud? I mean, typically we see most or a lot of people's journey to cloud is lift and shift. It's right, let's get the applications, the workloads onto the cloud, and then we'll do something about them later. In a lot of cases, that gets kicked down the road a little bit and things don't get done. And what we want to talk today is about why you really need to do it. Do not do modernization of your applications, and we'll get to that. But first, we're going to do something that we typically do on the show. I haven't done one for a little while, but we're going to have a cloudy cliffhanger. Da, da, da. Normally we've got some music that comes in there on the show. This is where I'm going to ask the speakers here a question based on a survey, and they're going to guesstimate the answer. It's a percentage question, so I'm going to give you a little clue. It'll be somewhere between 0 and 100. Not much more over that. So you can't go too badly wrong. We have had some terrible answers on this. And I'm actually going to base this on one of our surveys. This is a survey that is not yet released. It's an info brief that we have worked on with IDC, and it's going to be coming out in the next week or so. So I thought we'd have a little bit of an insight into this. We surveyed 610 companies across Europe and the US. Quite a mixture in organization sizes. All of them were over 1,000 employees. 28% were sort of big enterprise over 10,000. 24% were 1,000 to 2,500. 26% were 2,500 to 4,999 or 5,000, and then we had 22% being 5,000 to 10,000. So fairly large organizations and a nice split. It also came from different verticals, so financial services, media, professional services, transport and logistics, energy, healthcare, government, and retail. So again, a nice sort of mix across that. And there was a whole bunch of questions that were asked, and we've created an info brief that comes up and talks around a number of the highlights that we got from the survey and how it actually relates to some trends that we tend to come out with on an annual basis. But I thought for today, I would ask you a question from this, and Darren was actually part of this. So let's see how well he knows the.
I'll still be terrible.
Yeah, exactly. So we asked the respondents, and this is for companies. So we had some respondents that had limited cloud use, but for the respondents that had what they would describe as extensive public cloud usage, right? We asked them whether they were overspending compared to their budget, and if so, how much in terms of percentage. So, were you overspending? Yes. We had a budget of $1 million. We're spending $2 million. We're 100% over budget. My question to each of you is, how many, in terms of percentage, of the respondents said they overspend by more than 10%? Phil, let's start with you.
Oh, do they run good IT shops with good cloud practices?
Well, this is the whole thing, right?
Or how honest are they?
Yeah, exactly.
Let's go with 15%.
15%. Okay. Darren, what do you think?
I reckon it's really high. I reckon it's 37%.
37%. Okay. And Gaurav, what do you think? What's your sort of percentage on overspend there?
I'll play it safe. 27.3491.
27.3491. Right, we are going sort of in the middle there. Right. Well, the correct answer for that is you're going to have to wait. This is the cliffhanger. We'll tell you at the end. Darren, over to you. Why must I modernize my app?
I think anyone who wants to put their percentages in the chat as
well, if anyone else
feel
wants to have a
free
guess, feel free on the public chat there.
So, why modernize your application is a good question. So I thought we'd start with the obvious, get the wiki definition of app mod, which is, and I am reading this, the conversion or rewriting of applications and or data to modern computer languages, architecture, and underlying technology. The focus seems to be incredibly technology based for me personally when it comes to app mod. And I know that's because it's in the name, it's application based modernization. But I think from my experience in doing this, actually, it's really tricky to influence the people and the processes around the application that you are actually modernizing. And what I thought we would do on that subject is go to Phil first to talk specifically about the executives' world and their view on what keeps them up at night about this subject, about their landscape, especially the enterprise, as generally they're the ones that have decades of legacy applications that reside in data centers or dotted around the globe accordingly. My personal opinion is one of the things that keeps them up at night is legacy systems that they just ignore or leave. We'll just worry about that next year. We'll worry about that next year. We'll worry about that next budget. So Phil, to kick it off, what do you think keeps, or what kept you up at night at McDonald's on this subject?
I think there's a couple of themes. One is speed. How do you keep up with the pace of change? I'll come back to that because you alluded to this, Darren. This isn't all about technology. The other is risk. The risk of doing nothing or the risk of doing something. So you talked about legacy applications, or as I increasingly hear, heritage applications, because often these are at the heart of your business. You look at your typical mainframe. your mainframe knows more about your business processes than pretty much any individual in your organization, because it's grown over time. People have added to it. It is the living representation of how your business really runs. And then compounding that, it's normally pretty stable. It's just not flexible. Compounding that, people are leaving the workforce. The folks who develop that system in the first place, who understand the technology and the application, and even the why behind some of the decisions made in that application, a lot of those are leaving and retiring. So that in itself creates a risk. So you got that risk of changing something which is sort of stable but isn't supporting your future business needs, and the risk of doing nothing and not being able to keep up with demand. So that's one I hear quite a bit. In terms of other aspects, how do you find that right balance between technology and value? It's very easy as you start to modernize the application to think that the outcome is a modern application, and that's sort of it, but it's there to support business value. So how do you pace the changes you're making with the value you need to deliver? You don't really want to pause your entire business, re-platform something over 18 months, and then allow your business to start getting the benefit of it. I'm sure we're going to come on to some of those patterns for change later. Final thing I throw out there, going back to your point, Darren, is it's going to be very tempting to take your application and rewrite it in serverless. Is that necessarily the right thing to do? The technology choice may be sound, but where should you actually be changing your business processes today? Are you still running the right business processes? And a lot of folks, and we see this particularly with SaaS applications, a lot of folks like to gravitate towards changing the application rather than changing how people work. And we know the most effective way of going about that sort of modernization is really look deeply at your business processes. Ask, are they still relevant? How can we make them simpler? How can we take some bureaucracy out of the system? And then think about how does your future application reflect that?
I think that's a huge one. I read your article, the BMI, the Bureaucracy Mass Index, right? I think you were nodding to there. It's a really, really good point, especially around being able to scale and pivot as part of that business element around the technology. And the best example I've had in recent times was advising organizations where they couldn't, the application, the app mod was important, but actually the business need was the business they were in, the organization they were working in, needed to pivot quickly, but it took 8 to 12 weeks to perform that pivot, but which time that market opportunity had gone, it disappeared. And what was keeping that exec team up at night was the fact they couldn't do it, and they were continuously losing because of it. And that was business, and the technology was there, but they couldn't organize their own organization from demand to delivery in the ability to leverage the technology. So it wasn't all application modernization. Actually, it was the people and process as well, which is quite painful for them to realize that they had to change themselves, not just modernize their app.
It's hard though, isn't it? Often you'll hear about Wagile, so the IT
Wagile, yeah,
sets themselves up as agile, as an agile organization. A colleague of mine looked at one organization he was familiar with from years ago, and they had 2-week sprints. But if you looked at the true sprint, it was 84 weeks from budget approval, release permission, blah, blah. Yeah, all of that sort of surrounding stuff, which wasn't necessarily and often wasn't at all anything to do with the technology.
Yeah. And I think the biggest use case, I think it was 2016 or 2017, the CTO at Trainline was at reInvent, right, on stage, talking about they did a release a month that the board had to sign off on. And this is an application that in the UK, that whereby you can book your train ticket, etc. They would do a release a month at the weekend that the board would have to sign off on, which just seemed absolutely crazy. And now they're doing between 70 and 120 releases a week of the same application. It's just insane. But they valued the technology as much as they valued the people change as well as part of that.
I'm a customer of Waitrose. During COVID, Waitrose replatformed their e-commerce the serverless. They were doing 3 releases a year. They're now doing 100 a month, and increased customer satisfaction, and improved checkout speed, and the ability to take more orders. So when you can talk about that from a business point of view, that's what gets executives excited.
Yeah, absolutely. So, Gaurav, how do we pick the right app to modernize?
Yeah, I think that's it obviously, I'm an architect. I like to say it depends. But I think it begins with picking a trusted partner. So shameless plug there to Evident. But picking a trusted partner, being engaged and committed to that change process itself. Phil talked about the business process change, and so that's a key element, right? The way that we approach this particular problem is by carrying an upfront assessment, right? So the assessment there is covering all the paradigms of architecture, and paradigms of architecture include business architecture. So we think about things like integration, security, the data, the infrastructure. And out of that, I think there's 2 ways to go about it. There's let's go both feet in. You pick a core system that's essential, and you start moving that, because once you move that, everything else becomes easier. That's one way to look at it. The other way to look at it, let's pick up the easiest, the lowest hanging fruits. What applications have the least amount of interdependencies, lowest amount of risk? Let's move these first. And then let's think about strangling out this core system. So if you have a legacy mainframe system hanging about on premise, moving it straight up into the cloud and saying we're lifting and shifting it may not be enough. It might be too risky. It might be disruptive. How about we add layers of APIs and start strangling out the host, and then think about how we're going to retire it? But I think the most important piece is doing that assessment. Your company needs are unique, and I think those have to be taken into consideration as you pick which apps to move first.
I think it's also interesting to understand and get buy-in from how the economic net impact of picking the right application. So you're going to pick an application. It needs to be one that, like Phil says, the exec then can see the impact of doing that, because it does mean that we can be more agile with our data. I think one of the guests myself and Jez had from Jollibees, I think it was Jez, I can't remember the chap's name. He was talking about modernizing one of
Marcos
that's
Cadena.
it. Yeah. CTO, right? And CIO. And he was talking, and we were discussing their modernization of some of their data and the way they pivot their data, and utilizing APIs to call weather patterns, knowing that if it's rainy, more people will step into the restaurant. So could we offer, cheaper coffee that day, or whatever it may be, and actually relating a technical deliverable, a technical capability that can pivot quickly against a business revenue, which then makes that economical reason to modernize that application or modernize that feed. I think that was a really interesting example of how they were doing that as part of their modernization. Then actually they were talking about what else can we do with freely available data as part of the fact that we've modernized one of our core systems to be able to then pivot, obtain the external data, and then turn it into something that can become an economical or revenue generation from there. Phil, do you have any examples of that, or any thoughts with your engagements to date or previous lives, whereby actually if we modernize this application first, it makes more sense than doing this huge legacy mainframe system that could take as long as a decade to get it out from where it was previously?
I'm going to sound like a consultant, which I'm not, but you almost want that sort of 2x2, the risk.
It depends.
It does depend. I agree with her. I mean, a good architect, it does depend.
It does depend.
But I think there's a balance of things. So there is the risk. I mean, is there an immediate risk you need to mitigate? Is it a long-term risk? Is there a bigger risk of actually re-platform in the first place? What's the reward for the business? But I think the other aspect too is that sort of show and tell with the executive, building up the credibility with the execs that by making these investments, because we love to talk about technology debt, and it doesn't really translate. I mean, I think of it as a bit of a garden. If you leave your garden and you never tend it, it's going to be pretty messy pretty quickly. So you can't just build a garden and say, job done, let's move on to the next one. But demonstrating that this isn't just about moving to a new cool technology or the latest version of something, but there is real business value in doing this. You pick on I think a very apt one at the moment, which is how do you liberate your data? We see that massive growth in data. We've got organizations that were complaining they didn't have data, now to organizations complaining they have lots of data. They just can't get it out of their applications or functions. So, what are some of those? And often they are quick wins. They aren't necessarily technically complex, but they have a disproportionate impact at the executive level in terms of opening their eyes up, really opening their imagination to my life. If we can do this with this small application, what can we do if we start looking at our crown jewels? And then obviously, Gaurav mentioned strangling your applications. How do you break this down so you're not prioritizing a massive mainframe migration where if you get it wrong, you've just wasted 2 years, but you do start to decompose that, you start to strangle the application. And even in that one application, how do you prioritize which pieces you pull off first and then re-platform in some way to deliver business value?
It feels like we're going back to the cloud strategy thought process of do a lighthouse first to prove it to everyone, including the execs. Once we've done the lighthouse, then the rest will naturally follow, and we can prioritize those based on bang for buck, etc. It's like the same. It's as if the same framework works really well.
Yeah, I think they're probably having this conversation 500 years ago about something too. I mean, it's perfectly, it's how do you get people excited and emotionally engaged and intellectually engaged around this stuff? But absolutely, it's the same framework.
How do we see the benefit quickly? Yeah, I think that's fair. I think one of the things we touched on is why too, but I think the other one we should also cover is why not. And I think we'll get Phil and Gaurav, both of your opinions on this. Is of that big list, if you've got a big dirty list of applications, what are the ones you would ignore? What are the ones that you just not going to bother touching? In my head, it's the ones that are big, ugly, and complex initially. I know that phrase is done to death, but Phil, in your experience, which of the ones would you advise execs not to bother going near for a period of time?
Well, I took offense at that phrase. That's what my wife calls me, big ugly. I would take a bit of a different angle on this.
I wouldn't say that complex, Phil.
Simple then. I'd take a bit of a different angle on this because some of those complex applications, you actually want to start fairly early figuring out the how to and the experiments you need to figure out how to decompose it. I'm a fan of Wardley maps, and if you look at an organization, what makes you competitive? And I'm quite surprised how many organizations, if you talk to 10 people, you get 10 different answers. But if you really look at what makes an organization competitive, ideally you want to invest most of your technology spend, your people's time, your thought process in those areas that are truly competitive advantage. But there's this process of evolutionary flow. So something that made you competitive 10 years ago or 40 years ago, maybe it was a call center you built as a bank. Now, why would you build that? It's no longer a competitive advantage. So rather than re-platforming what you have a long, hard think about the sort of build versus buy philosophy in your organization, which is normally in itself an interesting conversation. If you can buy some of this stuff, which is important but non-competitive, so replace the application versus re-architect it, re-platform it, go down that path. I'd go back to what I said earlier about people change, though. There's the anti-pattern, which is often organizations will say, my HR system doesn't make me competitive, so let's just go buy one. And then shortly after you've acquired a SaaS solution, the same business wants to say, when I say we don't we're not competitively unique in this area. I don't want to change my business processes. So can we customize the Jesus out the SaaS app? And then you end up in the worst of both worlds. You can't keep up with the SaaS provider's roadmap, and you've just created technical debt. So I'd sort of dive deep into, we'd call it the 7 R's. What do you actually need to replatform? What can you just lift and shift because it gives you some immediate benefit? But then what can you retire or replace?
Yeah, it's a really interesting. You go back to messaging and understanding. Does everyone know what we do and whether we're buying or? Well, I spent some time working a few years ago with EasyJet, and it was refreshing that everyone had the same message. Everyone had that we are a low cost airline where we're one of the first you could buy online or via the phone. And that rang true on everyone you spoke to, and it was actually refreshing that was their mantra. We are, and then I've worked with organisations that we won't be named, whereby they don't have that situation, and then they do exactly what you say. They buy off the shelf, then completely rewrite the SaaS solution, and then they should have just gone with what they know. Gaurav, from your experience, do you have any apps you avoid in your world, or try with that first engagement with a client? Do you say, look, there's a list of these that we should know about, we should understand? There are known knowns within our paradigm of knowns, and we should not go down that route. Is there a list that you kind of reel off quick?
Yeah, I'm not sure if we have a list, but just to go back to one of the points you made, my experience is the big, ugly, complex applications are the ones we tend to focus on most and tend to modernize. But oftentimes what happens is when we go to customers and we're getting to know their business processes and trying to understand the scope and their applications and their dependencies, we often ask questions like, well, why do you do it this way? And the answer at times is, it's always been done this way.
Yeah.
And that's when you start going down that rabbit hole. It's like, well, and that's a legitimate answer. That was based off legacy systems, the technology wasn't there to support them at that point. So they worked around that problem. Does this problem exist today? Do you really need this business process? And Phil talked a lot about the business aspect of this. Does it even make sense to keep carrying on the way you've been doing it, or is there a better, more efficient way to do this? The other aspect is, well, if we do move it, this is the cost of moving it. What's the cost benefit? Does the economics of this even make sense to begin with? So that's kind of the list we kind of go down. Like, let's look at the business process. Let's look at the cost of actually doing the modernization. What value we'll get out of it? Is there any risk to this application not being moved? And those are some of the factors that we take into consideration.
I think that's starting to touch again on, Phil, your point on Agile, that waterfall Agile thought process. The greatest example of that, and I use it a lot with the teams that I advise, is if you were to sit in a room with your customer, whether it's an internal customer or an external customer, and you said to them, I want you to think about, I want you to design me a vehicle or an item to get me from point A to point B. Most people will go off and design a car rather than that mentality of building from short, nimble. I prefer using the word nimble than agile. Nimble thinking, in that we could actually, it might just be some skateboards, or it might be something smaller than that. But these applications have been built out, and these processes around these applications have been built out over time to think that we know what the customer wants, or we know what needs to happen, and we fall into that waterfall trap of lots and lots and lots of non-functional requirement gathering or functional requirement gathering, and doing all these processes. And actually, we're not getting to the root cause of what the business is trying to do and how the technology can help that with that, like, Wardley map style, chain of value versus what's occurring. Does that ring true, Phil, or am I just mumbling like a consultant should?
No, it does. You remind me of something else. It was I read a report years ago before I joined AWS that about 50% of functionality that an organization builds is never used. And I didn't believe it. So a colleague of mine audited one of our systems, and lo and behold, all of that stuff which we were told if we didn't build it, it would bring the business to its knees, had never been used. So, why would you go to the expense and time effort of rebuilding something someone isn't using in the way you assumed it was being used in the first place? And I know where you use the word nimble, not agile, because there's this whole agile industrial complex, and Darren, you're a project manager. Tomorrow you're going to be a product owner, and it's just like, what does that mean? But I think one of the other red flags for me when thinking about what do you rebuild or what do you modernize is who outside of technology is going to be your partner, because a lot of this legacy or heritage technology is used in ways that no one's written a requirement around. Folks have found workarounds and such like. We know a large number of transformations fail because people don't consider the impact on the human being that's going to use this application at the end of the day. So having a partner who's going to say, this is how it's really used. Yes, I am going to run the change process of introducing this new product, while technology can actually focus on modernizing the application. Otherwise, we've all been there. I hate my phone until you show me the new phone, and then my old phone doesn't look as bad, or the green screen, or whatever that analogy is. As humans, we're not that wired to accept change. So someone has to take them on the journey, even if it's just something simple like reskinning an application.
Yeah, I think it's completely valid point. I'm interested to move and talk about methods of approach.
Can I just want to jump in. I mean, I love it, but just a little story from my past about things getting done just because they've always been done. As I said, I worked in the hotel world. We had about 80 5-star hotels, and every week the general managers of each hotel had to send a report to chief operating officer. And it would take them 3 or 4 hours to put the report together. Plus, they'd have to get information from all of their team heads within the hotel. And this thing was quite complex, and it got sent off. And anyway, there was a new chief operating officer joined the company, and one of the general managers thought, I wonder if this thing is ever actually getting read. So, in about 3 or 4 places throughout the report, he wrote, "If you're reading this and you mention it to me, I will send you a free case of fine wine." Anyway, he never got that call. He mentioned it to the chief operating officer at the next face-to-face and said, "Look, we're sending you this thing." And the guy was like, "I didn't even know it existed." So quite quickly, they got rid of that and saved everyone a lot of time, effort, and wasted time and effort. So it really is, as you say, Phil, a lot of things are built, never used. Somebody thinks it's important at the time or urgent at the time. And it does just go along with that. If you're going to refactor, just really take a look at what it is you're doing and decide whether you really need to do it or not, right? Don't just do it because it's always been done that way.
I think sometimes things can be done by council as well, decision by council, as in, I'm the business owner of this thing. I need this done. Normally would pass it to, say, IT, and they would do it for me. That's fine. But now we see, or in big enterprises, it goes through lots of gates and they add things in. And then suddenly it's always been like that. And then what you actually end up with is not what the customer so desired.
It's that phrase, isn't it? A camel is a racehorse designed by committee.
Correct. There you go. And that's the epitome of what we're discussing. That if you can strip that back and focus on the technology, and part of that app modernization can help with sitting and listening and understanding what the customer or client is after as part of that modernization. So moving on methods of approach. So Gaurav, talk us through a why, when, and how. And then the last question I have on that as well is, how do we measure success as part of that? I know some of it is, straightforward uptake and revenue or whatever it may be. They're the ideal lighthouses. But can you give us some examples of why organisations you've worked with have modernised, when they've done it, in what cycle of budgeting or whatever it may be, or technology refresh, and then their how they went about it, how they approached it. And then it would be also interesting to know how they measured that success, or whether they measured it at the end of a project, or whether they looked at milestones accordingly and their metrics for that.
Sure. So let me start with perhaps one way to illustrate some is by example, perhaps. And I think one of the examples that we have, or the case studies that we have, is with Toyota Canada Credit Inc. Right. This is that's a short is TCCI. So TCCI offers Toyota, Lexus, and Subaru dealers and customers financial services. So think about loans and leases on your vehicles, and insurance and other vehicle financing services. One more thing to know about TCCI, and this is pre-modernization. They're actually a global leader in operational efficiency. They have more outstanding leases and loans per employee than any other regional operation for Toyota. And this is in spite of the legacy systems that we're using. And this was really preventing them from, bringing new business initiatives to market, to innovate, providing exceptional customer experience. So let me describe a customer experience prior to modernization. If you wanted a statement of account, say, right, it's a simple document, you would call into their customer service helpline. A representative would assist you. They would key in a code to the mainframe system. The mainframe overnight would run a batch. It would print out those documents, physical printouts. Those would be put into envelopes. Those would be mailed out. And within 2 days or 3 days, you would have a copy of your document in hand, right? So that's what we're dealing with. But obviously, this is not an optimal experience for the customer. This is not where TCCI wants to be. So they recognize that they need a change. The other thing is, we talked about the mainframe system. So you have a legacy system, and there's only a certain number of folks who know how it's built, what's in it, and they're close to retirement age as well. So they're going to, at some point not be available. There's a risk to that system being your core system. You need to move off it. There's also, high fees that you're paying, whether it be operations, whether it be the maintenance of it, whether it be licensing, right? So a number of factors being the why do you want to move. So how do you go about this? So there, you're going to hear things like, well, we're going to use serverless, we're going to use containerization, we're going to use, these are all tools in your toolbox, right? What you have to do is see how you apply them. I'll give you an instance of this. So one of the things we did is, as we had to move the data from the mainframe system, we were strangling out the mainframe. So we had to move the data out from this mainframe system and into AWS. So we could not extract deltas. We could not do the incremental extractions from the mainframe host. We just had to take the whole, every day was the same file size, right? Humongous number of records. And the tooling that helped us, the serverless technologies that helped us, were things like DynamoDB and DynamoDB streams, where you can detect records that have been changed in a streaming method. You can now make it event driven, so you can detect not only the type of change on the record, but you can categorize it now by doing a diff. So that's the tool set that helped us. Was a lot of serverless, a lot of Lambdas and Fargate and Athena. Those kind of technologies helped us. So what was the outcome of this? How do we measure it? So there's a couple of metrics we took in April. So this is about 16 months post the first release, and we took the measurements. What did we actually achieve anything? Were we successful in any of the initiatives that we were running? So first of all, 30% average increase on case resolution per associate per month. Now, this is a company that's already quite efficient. Now you're seeing that as a statistic. So just by modernizing applications, business processes, adding that performance and efficiency, we're seeing an uplift in that. I think we had 40% of calls were diverted to the self-service portal. So less work for the agents to do. 56% of those were absolutely automated, so no human hands touching it. What that converts into is about, I think it was 2,600 or so man days saved. And that's about 10 full-time employees. The one statistic that made a personal impact to me was 425,000 sheets of paper saved. Now, that translates into 50 trees in 16 months saved. So as someone who's personally, thinks about sustainability and climate change, just 16 months and saving 50 trees is very impactful. So, when you think about the metrics, there's more to it than just the economies and the risk. There is also the soft aspects of it, the sustainability, the motivation of the team post modernization. Those are a little harder to measure, but there are measurements we can take, and there's more to it than just the economies.
Those measurements are like tick, tick, tick. Were those measurements defined pre-project or post-project, if you don't mind me asking?
A number of them were actually, which is why we were able to do that comparison. We did those. They had a data house from beforehand, before the modernization. So we were able to take the case resolution times, for example, pre-modernization and then post-modernization when we had them on new systems. There was a number of measurements we had taken beforehand as well, just to be able to compare. And we're going to be taking these at regular times and snapshotting them just to see how effective it is.
I think it's a really important point is to understand where your baseline is. Because I think one of the things, Phil, you touched on winning hearts and minds with doing this from an executive perspective. It can be dangerous that it can just feel like things are better. Having those hard and fast numbers post that as well are really, really important. And it can't, on top of winning hearts and minds and that this is the right thing to do, et cetera, because all these things, actually, we're here, here's our baseline, and this is where we've gone to. Isn't it fantastic? Aren't we all great? So from I'm conscious of time. If we don't do this, organizations that don't modernize their applications, or it's not on their radar, and I think there are some out there that potentially, with the current financial economic situation, there may be a few that look at it and don't prioritize it right now. What do we think the risks are? For me personally, I think we now live in a world where it's not the big eating the small, it's the nimble eating the slow. What do you think the risks are, Phil, from your perspective, where you see with your customers? What do they worry about for not doing this or not progressing their transformation or app mod?
Well, it reminds me of that joke that's done its rounds where the CFO says to the CEO, I'm worried if I invest in my people, they'll leave. And the CEO says, I'm worried if I don't, they'll stay. And similar in the app world. If you don't invest in your applications, if you don't keep them healthy, if you don't keep them agile, not to overuse that word, then you're going to suffer as a business if you can't get the data out. What do businesses really care about? It's about being profitable, being sustainable, being relevant to their customers, understanding what their customers want, creating that network effect where you lower your prices, you get more customers, you get more insight into the customers, which then drives potentially broader range and the ability to lower prices. That flywheel. This isn't about application modernization as a technology thing. It's about making sure that your business stays resilient, it can innovate, and it can drive cost out. And I think that's the thing we often don't look at enough is what is the true total cost of ownership of your application? Not from the application point of view, but when you look at your business processes, what you can and can't do, the people involved. I was working with a customer recently where they use a fairly old in-house data management solution, which sort of worked. But no one ever talks about the 10 people they've hired to correct all the data that's dirty. So you're really sort of understanding what's that cost, because you can create your own virtuous cycle here. If you incrementally modernize your applications, then you can actually drive cost out, which then gives you the ability to invest that into things which are really going to drive your business. And it goes back to some of the metrics, things like the ability to get an experiment into the hands of your customers quicker, to figure out whether it's worth pursuing or not, as opposed to this addiction to prediction where we put together a 4-year project plan. So the risk is you become irrelevant.
Yeah, I think they're really good points. Your point on employing people to paper over the cracks, or at least fix something like data. It's like the old post room analogy, right? We're getting more posts, get more people to open the post and distribute it. It's like, let's change the system completely first, please. Yeah. It's a really interesting point. So, Jez, cliffhanger time. I am normally terrible at these.
Right. So, well, thanks. Look, great discussion. And there's a couple of questions which we will get to in a second. So appreciate that. Yes, earlier in the show, this is our cloudy cliffhanger. I asked a question. Now, please do feel free. We've had a few answers that have come in from the audience that are listening. So feel free if anyone would like to, as I'm asking this, and before I say the answer, put your guesses in there. So this is based on a survey that we carried out. Actually, we worked with IDC to do some research. 610 companies, good mix of size, good mix of geography, good mix of vertical industries. And one of the questions we asked was about cloud spend and actually cloud overspend. So this was to companies that had an extensive use of public cloud. And we asked the question, are you overspending? And if so, how much are you overspending compared to your budget or what you'd expected to spend? And I asked you what percentage of those that said, yes, we are overspending, were overspending by more than 10%. So we've had a few guesses. And as I said, anyone else would like to guess as well, please do. But Phil, you came in at 15%. Darren went a bit higher, 37%. Gaurav, you sort of went down the middle there, 27.3491%. Very, very precise. We've had a few guesses online. We had a 40%, we had a 57%, we had an 80%, we had a 65%, and we had somebody saying 100%, right? Saying that everybody is overspent greater than 10% of their budget. Anyway, one person was within 5%, which is normally what we sort of say is a good thing. But it wasn't one of our panelists. A big L from all of our panelists there. The actual correct answer was 45%, which is quite high, right? I mean, 45% of people is going, well, yeah, I didn't even get it within 10%. So congratulations to participant 586. That's all I've got. I don't have a name or anything. Who got 40%? But just to give a little bit more clarity on that and the sort of results that we saw. In fact, 99% of the respondents said yes, we overspend. 54% were under the 10%. Between overspending by 11 to 25%, 22%. Overspending between 26 and 49% was 18%, and 5% actually said, yeah, no, I'm more than 50% out. So I think we can see that people are not quite getting their cloud spend right, and I think there's a massive mixture of getting the right governance in place for that. Actually looking at the workloads, refactoring, modernizing. Again, I think with some of these sort of lift and shift exercises, you're not running a very efficient cloud by not sort of using cloud native services and just having sort of fat apps sitting on there. So a lot that you can do with cost, getting some right FinOps opportunities in place, huge amount of things you can do there. And it's iterative, right? This is not something you do once and forget about it. Continually look at your spend. So yeah, not a great feedback there from the panelists. I guess, Darren, you were closest, but you were 8% away. So I'm going to have to give that to our panelists there. So not panelists, one of the audience members, 586. Well done. Kudos to you. So we had a couple of questions. Firstly, should Craigslist update its website? It works for all these years without CICD. I mean, I don't know. Anyone can take that. Look, from my opinion, yeah, okay. Just because it's always worked doesn't mean they're running it in the most efficient way. They probably could get way more efficiencies out of it. Yeah, it works. It's fine. But if they suddenly have a competitor coming out, who knows, right? What's around the corner, and they're not doing something efficient, there's going to be quite a lot of cost in there, I think. But Phil, get your
I'm
thoughts on
trying to think of that Hemingway quote, and it goes. I'll probably get it wrong, but how did you fail, Mr. Hemingway? Well, firstly, very, very slowly, and then very quickly.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. So it's being. I don't know much about Craigslist. It's about being able to respond, especially now in a very volatile, very competitive environment.
Yeah. And the second question there was, any advice on user adoption and training? Modernize applications to users and ensuring smooth adoption can be a challenge. I mean, I guess it depends if you're talking about the user that's consuming the application. I mean, to me, refactoring, modernizing your application, the user experience should be the same, right? Or better, or intuitive. Part of the modernization should be actually looking at the UI and the experience in terms of, we shouldn't needing to have training. If you need to train somebody on how to use an application, it's tending to not do its job, right? Any app that you're downloading these days and putting on your mobile device, very rarely do you need somebody to train you on how to do it and how to use it. Gaurav, good to get your 2 cents on that.
I think UI UX plays a huge part of the modernization journey. You really can't look at modernization as just being a technology initiative. Yeah. UI UX has to be in there. Some of it should be intuitive, like you said. It should not require major amounts of retraining. But I think part of the work that we do is that as we deliver, we also have a stage during which we have training and change management is part of that whole delivery process, part of that modernization process. And it's essential part, so that if you, like as I mentioned, if you've been doing things just because it was done that way, and now we're moving you on to a better way to do it, let's also have you trained. So I do think that change management and training plays an essential role in modernization.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Involve the people. I mean, it's the simple answer to some of this.
Exactly.
Is bring them on the journey with you.
As part of that modernization process, involve people, get the culture included, right? Don't tell them this is how it is. Ask them how they want it and involve them. Be inclusive. Totally. Okay, very last quick bit. So on our show, we normally have a section called TSR's 10-second recommendation, and we are going to keep this short and sweet. This is where we like to just talk to audience about something we may have experienced, seen, good sort of recommendation on something. Doesn't have to be work related, doesn't have to be IT related, doesn't have to be cloud related. Darren, let's start with you. What do you got for us?
I'm going to say it again. So yes, my soccer team / football team were promoted to the Premier League. Our stadium is a meme currently. Please just Google Kenilworth Road. It is horrendous and fantastic in the same sentence. It's not changed since 1905. There's only certain places you can get hot drinks because there's only certain places where there's electricity in the ground, and I'm not lying. But yeah, have a Google, have a look. It's one of the oldest grounds in the country / world that's not been redeveloped. It's a sight to behold.
10-second recommendation, not the 10-minute one. Phil.
I can't even remember Darren's football team. True. So I have to say this.
Lycan or something? I don't know.
Yeah, Wrexham. AWS
Wrexham.
Summit.
Wrexham, that was it.
On the 7th in London, for anyone in London, we've got our summit going on next week. But a book recommendation, I read it on holiday. It's called This Is How They Tell Me the World Ends by Nicole Perlroth. And it's quite an interesting reading for anyone interested in security, technology security, just getting some insights. And it's a real sort of wake-up call to take that stuff seriously.
Brilliant. And we're at the summit. If anyone's there on the 7th in London, please do feel free and come and say hello. Gaurav, what have you got for us?
As a Canadian, I am obligated to speak about ice hockey. the playoffs, the final Stanley Cup finals start on Saturday between Vegas and Florida. You'll notice there's no Canadian team. There's been no Canadian team for the last 30 years. My favorite team, the Toronto Maple Leafs, have not won since 1967. So here's my recommendation. If you enjoy cheering on an underdog, I'm looking at you, Darren, here. I would highly recommend the Toronto Maple Leafs. If you enjoy the annual tradition of being disappointed, Maple Leafs are your team.
Didn't Wayne Gretzky play for them?
No, unfortunately.
Right, okay. He's the only ice hockey player I know. Brilliant, thanks. My quick recommendation, quite a gritty book I'm reading at the moment. Highly recommended. It's called In Deep by a lady called Angelia Bianca. Grew up in Chicago to a family that's sort of based in the mob, modern day mob. Ended up getting involved in gangs, really hit ground zero and sort of built herself back up. Spent a lot of time in jail and prison. Really, really good book. Gritty, read it. Well worth it. Brilliant. That is the end of the show. Phil, Gaurav, Darren, thanks ever so much for joining us. Really good to have you. Really good. Great discussion. We are obviously not going to bring this out as a podcast, but this will be available for people to watch. Do look out for a Cloudbusting pod. There is a link on the handouts here. Just search us, Google us. Feel free to listen. We're on any of your podcast platforms. We will be bringing out the info brief, the IDC info brief, so have a look out for that. We're also on Twitter at Cloudbusting Pod, and we're all on LinkedIn, so do feel free to connect to us. But thanks ever so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure, and we'll talk to you again soon. Bye-bye all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jez, and to the rest of our panel, thank you so much for joining us. Quickly, I would like to remind everyone that our session was recorded. You will be receiving an email with a link to access this recording on demand. But of course, you can find it living on the DevOps website at devops.com/webinars. And then just be sure to look in the on-demand section where you will find it waiting for you shortly. The 4 winners of our $25 Amazon gift card drawing, they are Amelia M., Martin S., Ashok K., and Gary G. So to our 4 winners, congratulations. Keep an eye on your inbox to claim that gift card. It should make its way to you in about the next 48 hours. If you don't happen to see that email, check your spam folder just in case it happened to get filtered out. I'd like to thank AWS and Eviden for sponsoring our program today. And to our audience who's still with us, thank you so much for being here. We really appreciate your time, and we would love to hear your feedback. As soon as we close out, there will be a survey that pops up. So let us know what you thought about this program, or perhaps if you have recommendations for an upcoming program, we would love to hear your feedback. Either way, we do hope to see everyone at a future Techstrong learning experience. Everyone have a great rest of your day. And to our panelists, thank you all once more for joining us on Techstrong Learning.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay.